Persuading people to take the actions we want can be hard. Our teams and clients are bombarded with thousands of messages every single day. But there is a way for you to get above the noise. Stories. This is the Stories with Traction podcast, and I'm your host, Matt Zaun. Join my guests and me as we unpack the power of storytelling. We'll talk about topics like leadership, sales, and marketing, all through the lens of strategic storytelling. Enjoy this episode. I'm so excited for this episode. This is part 2 with Amy Lynch. Many of you listened to the episode we recently did with Amy regarding book writing. For those of you who are not familiar with Amy, Amy is the founder and a writer at Fernling Creative, which is a premium writing agency that generates exceptional content in your voice because words sell. We had this awesome conversation about how Amy was able to write all the different books that she has, which is really fascinating to me because, as many people listening know, it is an uphill battle to write a book. It's like climbing a mountain in many people's lives. Tons of people want to do it, but they don't even know where to start. So I'm really excited to dive into more of the systematic approach Amy has and go from there. Amy, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back, Matt. It's brave of you to invite a nerd back who likes to talk about nerdy stuff, but I had a great time last time and happy to be back.
So I found the last episode we did incredibly insightful. One of the things that you mentioned that I want to expand on, I want to dive into more of your systematic approach and concepts, was one of the things you said was you create a core concept that everything in the book is tied to, and you brought up the image of a bike tire. So everyone can visualize that bike tire with the spokes, and how if there's a bunch of spokes that are off or bent, it can be very dangerous with someone biking, right? They can get in a serious accident. So we want all of those spokes to basically go to one common theme. And I thought that was really intriguing. So let's break down systems for people. So people listening, there's a lot of people listening that they want to get a book into the world. That is incredibly overwhelming to them. So how would they even figure out how to get a core theme? What would be some of the things that they can do, a couple steps to try to hone in on one specific core theme?
Right. Well, that's the first conversation we have when a new client and I sit down, and we always start out in person, Matt, because I just love to hear the person's voice, and it takes me a couple hours to really hear the way the person speaks, their speech patterns, which as a ghostwriter, that's really important to me that I can mimic. I'm a bit of a chameleon. So I can really get their voice and then sound like them as we write together. So we do that in person, and we sit down, and honestly, the very first thing we talk about is, why the heck are we here? What is on your mind that you are trying to accomplish? And a lot of times we don't know. People will say, I've been 40 years in this industry and it's meant so much to me. And I feel like I've learned so much. And I want to capture some of it for my team, for my company, for my kids, for the business community. But the objectives are vague. So one of the very first things we do is we talk about objectives. And I ask questions like, how do you want your book to serve readers? What are you hoping that the person reading it will feel and experience and gain? And then we just project 1 or 2 years in the future. And I ask the question, what will have happened that made all this effort worthwhile? Like, if you look back in 2 years, what would be the thing that happened that really made this effort worth the trouble? And the answers are very different. You know, some people say a New York Times bestseller. Some people say, literally, I've heard this, if my 3 children read this book. So they will go all that effort for 3 readers. If these 3 children of mine who are adults read this book, mission accomplished. It's all that I'm hoping for. I ask for a single event, like if we had a book release, a book launch, or if a young person out of college reads this and it it helps them to choose a healthy path for their future. I had a person say that to me one time who's in his 70s, saying he's observing that college grads that he was interviewing were confused as to why they were joining the business community. He said, if I could just clarify that for them, how to keep the right priorities in place, it would all be worth it. So just objectives. What are you hoping will happen with this before we actually talk about the core message of the book? That's first. And then the second, we spend a long time identifying an avatar reader. Because who do we really want to read this book? Because a lot of times people start on a writing project and they're just for the world. They're writing to put it out there. But there is no book that is for every person, man, woman, child, boy, girl, old, young. There's no book like that. Every book is targeting an audience where it will be meaningful for that audience. So we spend a long time talking in general about who is this for. So a recent book, we started out with for everybody, for the world. And then we got down to it's for professional women who are high level achievers between age 25 and 45, in essence, childbearing age, that which really made a difference to this particular book. So we get down to that. And then from there, we talk about the one sentence explanation of the book. And, if bike tire is not accessible to someone listening, everybody understands the GPS in their car, on their phone. Every time you go to an unknown place, you put in a very specific address. Nobody leaves their driveway without, if you don't know, if you're going to your church, you know how to get there. If you're going to someplace in Nashville and you're from Pennsylvania, you must put your GPS in there, or you don't know which way to turn outside your driveway, outside of your neighborhood, when you're getting onto the highway. It determines every step along the way. So that GPS address is, in essence, the one sentence explanation that your ideal reader would use to recommend their book to their friends or to explain your book to their friends. And we work and work and work until that one sentence explanation is crystal clear. And then we put it at the center of a mind map. And the whole book, like the spokes of a tire, that's the hub. And everything extends out of that one sentence explanation.
So, one of the things that I thought of while you were sharing this is really diving deep into the why. So, you and I both have a mutual friend, Alyssa DiNatal, and Alyssa has been my fitness coach for coming up on 3 years now.
Mhm.
When I originally reached out to her, I said, listen, I really want to lose some weight, which she's heard a million times before.
Right.
And she was the one that said to me relentlessly, why? She actually asked me why 5 times to get to my original why. So, why do you want to lose weight? And then I said, well, I want to have more energy. Well, why do you want to have more energy? Well, because I want to perform at the highest caliber for my clients. Why do you want to perform at the highest caliber for your clients? Because I want to make more money. Why do you want to make more money? Because I want to take care of my kids better than I was taken care of, because now there's more resources, there's more different things that can happen based on that. Well, why do you want to do that? So she kept going layers deep with the why, to go from I want to lose 20 pounds to I legitimately want to have awesome health so that I can be there for my kids and I can get them experiences and monetary things that I didn't have when I was a child. So we're really diving deeper into the why. Do you feel that you do that in these sessions? Do you feel often someone will just throw out, I want to do X, Y, and Z? Through the conversation that you have, you recognize, well, it's really not that they want to do X, Y, and Z. Here's the root of why they want to do that in the first place. Is that the intention of what you're doing with this exercise?
Yeah, 100%. You have to start there. I just go right back to that GPS example. You can't go somewhere where you don't know where you're going. And the why is the address in your GPS, the why plus the target audience. It's who you're going towards and why you're going there. Otherwise, how would we even know what to write and what order to put in and what should hit the cutting floor, like I talked about last time, because you can't write, even a person who's 20 years old can't write 20 years into a book. We make choices. And the way we make those choices, which is like the way we turn left or right at the end of your neighborhood, is by knowing, why are you writing this? And to whom are you writing this? And then thirdly, what is the message that you're sending? The essential message, which is the hub of a wheel with the spokes, or the final address in your GPS. Without those things, Matt, we will flounder and we will fail because we don't know where we're going.
So I love the example of a GPS. So let's continue to use it. So you and I are both in the greater Philadelphia area, for everyone listening. And if you and I jumped in a car together and we said, we want to drive to Los Angeles, so we punch an address in the LA area in our GPS. You and I both know what's punched in the GPS at that moment isn't going to happen exactly like that. We might drive a few states and there'll be a bridge that's out. So we need to reroute and go a different way. We're going to drive somewhere in the Midwest and there's going to potentially be some flooding somewhere. So now we need to go another way. Then we're going to, so all these different things, there's going to be traffic jams. It's going to reroute and say, do you want to get there quicker? Because there's a major accident ahead. So the reason why I'm saying all this is, do you ever find yourself really getting to the why of the entire intention of why someone wants to write a book, and then you start this process and you get 3 months in, and then the why changes or the goals change, or you need to reroute to, like, essentially you're still going to get there, right? We're still going to get to Los Angeles one way or another, but it's not going to be exactly like the GPS laid out in the beginning. Does that happen often, or is that very rare? And if so, how do you reroute to make sure you're still getting to the destination?
Mm-hmm. So there's one common pitfall, which in the example you're using, a bridge that's out. So there's one common bridge that's out in writing a book. If you go through the process where you have the objectives nailed down, you have the audience nailed down, and you have the main message, the one sentence explanation nailed down. I've never had an experience where I didn't get where we were going. That's never happened. This is the bridge that's out. We get going and we realize that one of the topics that we thought was a chapter, because it's very tightly related to the main concept, becomes too large. So, an example recently, I was writing a book with Kevin Nolan, who runs the largest residential painting company in, I think, the country, but certainly in Philadelphia. And we had the whole book laid out and we were just cruising through it. But then we got to the chapter on succession, because Kevin is currently passing his company on to the next generation. And we realized that that was a world, not a chapter. And it was tightly related to our GPS concept. So it had to stay in, but it became enormous because it's a 10-year process, according to Kevin. So when we got into that, we realized this is too large for a chapter, because, in a book, you generally keep the chapters in the ballpark of the same length. And then we hit one that was a universe. And so that is the bridge that's out sometimes, because my clients are all high-level professionals. They have a ton of expertise in their field. And then sometimes, they don't realize it, but a piece of their expertise is actually a whole world. And that's what happened with this book with Kevin. We realized that the succession is a full-length book. So what we did was we acknowledged that to the reader. If you are in a position where you're within 10 years as a reader of passing your company on, selling it, or passing it to another generation of owners, then you need to read my follow-up book on succession. But here are the key concepts to be considering, and then we just broke it down for everybody who's not within 10 years of retiring. These are the things to consider. Everyone who is within 10 years of retiring, here's the main things that you have to keep on your radar. But in the end, grab this second book. So we just acknowledge that. So that would be a common bridge out on the way to Los Angeles.
Thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you sit down with someone, you get to their why, their main why, you lay out all the chapters, You have a really good understanding of where to go, so what to punch in the GPS. So now I would be intrigued, as I'm sure many people listening would. How on earth do you personally, Amy, do that? Like you have written tons and tons of books. That is fascinating to people. This is such an uphill climb for people. Where do you start? Like, what would be a process or a systematic approach that you go to once you have the nuts and bolts of the ideas? How are you now actually writing the book for someone?
hmm So, ghostwriting and book coaching, it's a continuum that. So there are people who would be on the hard ghostwriting end of the continuum who just say, "Hey, Amy, this is an idea that I have. I think it's a gap in the literature, and I would really like a book on this topic." And they'll give me a 3-word topic and say, "Thanks. Let's do a 50,000 word book on that. Call me when it's done." Like that's the that's the hard left of ghostwriting. And then what is more common, I do have clients like that. And I actually love doing that. I love doing the research, and that's a fun project. But what is most common is that people are experts in their field and want to write where their expertise lies and need a hand along the way. So that would be, farther to the right of book, like co-authoring, co-writing, ghostwriting, yes, in that I take their content and make it expert quality writing. But the content is their own. That's common, and I love doing that. So that's something along more of a coach slash ghostwriter. So the process is we meet together to map it all out. We go through the steps I've already explained: objectives, audience, one sentence explanation. And then once we have that, then we're ready to lay out a table of contents. So, when I sit down in this first meeting, which has never been less than 2 hours, we usually can walk out in 2.5. And that's with a table of contents. So once we have the main concept, then I ask, well, let's just throw out there at random up to 10 topics that are very tightly related to this one sentence explanation that you are an expert on, that you could talk about at an expert level. And so they'll just chuck out, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 at the most, ideas related to that central idea that they really have significant experience and expertise on those areas. So then we just I write them down and then put them into some kind of a shape that we can talk about back and forth. And then I say, if you could only cover one, which one is it? And they point to it. And I put that on chapter 1. If you could only cover 2 of these and then you died, and that's a little morbid and dark, but we put it that way in smiling terms. And then they point to the second one. If they could only write 2 before they died, those 2. And we go, if there's 6 total topics there, we go down there until we have them in order of importance on that person's heart. And then we throw out words like, are these cause and effect? Like, is this order reasonable? Like, is any of these cause and the others effect? Is chronology a factor? Do we have to talk about a startup before we talk about succession? Well, yes. We can't have succession be chapter 1 and startup be chapter 6. That's illogical. So I have a bunch of questions like that we examine the 6 chapters that we're intending to write and make sure that they are in the proper order with all things considered. And then from there, we just go back to number 1 and we do another GPS. We put in how you can add a stop on your GPS if you need to get gas or Dunkin' Donuts. So we add a stop, which is writing out a 1-sentence explanation, just like the book has, but for that chapter. It has to have a goal of that chapter, that everything in that chapter is tied directly to, which of course is tied to the ultimate one sentence explanation, the GPS address that we're going to. So, like adding a stop, you choose the Dunkin' Donuts that's on the way to your destination and not the one that's in the opposite direction. So it's like that. We get a 1-sentence core message for that chapter, and we do the same thing again. What are the subheadings within that chapter we really want to talk about? and we come up with four. We check that they're in the right order. And then we have a GPS for chapter one. And then I have them get out their voice recorder and go through the subheadings. And they can't talk about anything but subheading A. And they ramble on subheading A. And then they stop and say, okay, I'm moving on to subheading B, which is this. And they talk about that. And they voice record it, or they just type it in, rapid speed, careless of grammar. And then they give me that. And then I take it from there.
The thing that's the most intriguing to me is the example you gave where someone gives you very little information. They give you a couple words and they say, write me a book, and in 8 months, I look forward to seeing it. I think that's bewildering to a lot of people because that is quite the ask. And you also mentioned Nolan painting. So let's use the painting example, right? We're a society of preparation. So from a painting perspective, people wouldn't dream of not having proper preparation in their house prior to painting, right? People put drop cloths down, they tape windows. So we are a society of preparation. We're also a society of warm up, right? So for anyone listening that does any kind of athletic activity, whether it's weightlifting or jogging or what have you, we like to warm our muscles up. So what fascinates me is someone, and I appreciate you sharing with us the organizational approach when there's a hybrid of you working with your client, tag teaming. But it is interesting to me to take just a couple pieces of information and then also make this really engaging book out of it. So is there anything that you personally do to warm up your brain, to prepare it to write and get into different concepts and maybe have this surge of creativity, if you will, so you could start the writing process? If so, what would be something that you do to warm up your brain to get to that point where you can start writing?
Mm-hmm. So I would say there's two things that I do regularly. Last time we talked about just palate cleansing. So if I spent the morning working on a medical book with a doctor I'm partnering with, who's writing an awesome book towards women, young women, then in the afternoon I were going to work on, if I was going to work on Kevin Nolan's book, which is an operating system for businesses, particularly businesses, contracting businesses. That's just such a radically different. So I might do a palate cleanse. I might have a lunch and sit and watch half an episode of a Korean drama that I'm into at that moment. Right now, I'm doing these 4-minute Korean reading lessons. Like 4 minutes is so short. So I might sit down and do 4 4-minute lessons and just really clear that medical book out of my brain. And then something that's so helpful to me, Matt, and I would think it would be helpful to everybody listening, since I know that your listeners are high level achievers, is walking. Walking is the key to just setting my mind free and seeing the big picture. You don't want to drop into the weeds and into the nitty gritty of a book project or someone's story. You can get so confused and muddled by the details in the weeds that walking outside completely sets my brain free. I think it would happen to everybody, and just lets me see the bigger picture, just lets my brain expand. So I do a 30-minute walk, but if I don't have time for that, I just step out onto my deck, which is, into a woods, and just think about the project and let my brain think, like, what are we doing here? Who cares about this? What is the point? What are we going for? What is the feel of this? And just ask the big questions and let my brain think about the big ideas of this project, which is capturing, if I was working on Kevin's book, 44 years of trials, ups and downs, running a contracting business. What worked, what didn't? How can other people avoid the trouble and the trial that Kevin talks about in his book as so difficult? How can people be free from that and be positioned in strength right from the get-go? And so just, not take any pens or computers or paper, but just let my brain absorb the big picture. What are we doing here and why are we doing it? So that would be a really common thing, especially if I'm transitioning from one project to another or one author to another because I'm getting out of one headspace and jumping into another person's headspace. So, walking outside or being outside with no writing utensils is super key. And then a second thing that I like to do, which I will sometimes do walking as well, and this is where I think people are really different. I know some people say, I think with a pen. I know some people that think with pictures. You've seen people draw those like pictures on, sometimes they'll put them on YouTube where all of their ideas turn into a graphic image. So they think that way. I think in mental shelving, mental shelves. So I like to do the same exercise with no pen and paper and just put into buckets the things that we're trying to accomplish in a book project. So I'll think about how does this author really going to connect? If young women age 25 to 45 is our target audience, we want to connect with that group. What are those people thinking? What are they worried about? What are they living through that this author can connect with them? So I have a bucket like that called connection. And then another bucket called engagement. What would really be interesting that would make them keep reading? Because when you read a book and write a book, the goal of every page is that the people turn the page and keep reading. Every paragraph, the goal is that they continue to read the next one. And that takes engagement. They must be getting value, but also interest out of their reading experience where they like what they're reading, they're benefiting, they're getting value, they're connecting personally. This person gets me. They know what I'm going through. And this book is helping me. I have to see what comes next. So just thinking about connection and engagement as a bucket and what am I going to put into that bucket? And then organizing the expertise. What would really be helpful to this audience based on this main idea? And so my brain works that way. We're with mental buckets sitting on mental shelves, and that stays with me. Other experts that I work with say that that would not work for them. They have to write it out into lists and categories, which is good, or draw it into pictures, and that's good. But if I'm outside, I can organize it mentally, and then I'm ready to move on to the next stage, which is layering the process.
So there's a lot to unpack with what you said. So first, if you were intrigued by the palate cleanse idea, highly recommend you go listen to the first episode Amy and I did. Absolutely fascinating, very insightful regarding palate cleanse. So just to try to do it justice, Amy had mentioned that she utilizes foreign language for that palate cleanse. So she is proficient in Korean, so she'll watch a Korean drama, and that resets her brain as it pertains to her writing English words. I found that fascinating. You also mentioned, Amy, a comment regarding classical music can help as a palate cleanse as well. So since that episode that we did, the first one, I have been thinking about ways from a palate cleanse perspective. So I'm still in the early stages of trying to figure out what works for me. But imagine me behind my desk working for a few hours. I need to almost reset my brain for the next project. So one of the things that I've been doing, and I don't know how good this is or not, but I'm starting, is I go into another room and I might just do a push-up or two
Mhm.
just to get my body moving, and then maybe I'll listen to some music, and then I'll go back and I'll start the next project. That's been a little bit of a reset for me, so I'm still working on that. So again, highly recommend everyone go listen to the first episode. I will include a link in the show notes. You can just click and go from there. I do want to talk about the walking piece because I think this is incredibly important. So there are people listening to this episode that are probably either verbally shouting at you, Amy, or in their mind they're shouting, saying, I don't have time for that, Amy. You don't know how busy I am. How can I block off time in my calendar to go for a walk? So here's what I would say to them. Two people come to my mind that experienced unbearable pressure and stress, had a million things going on in dire circumstances: Winston Churchill and Abraham Lincoln. So, Abraham Lincoln, Civil War, absolutely horrific, horrible circumstances. He blocked off time to go for a walk, to write his speeches, to collect his thoughts. Very well documented. Winston Churchill, World War II. London's being bombed. Airplane parts are falling out of the sky, hitting people's home in London, like horrific circumstances. His island is in the process of being taken over. He blocks off time to go for a walk, to collect his thoughts. And might I add, to dive into story strategy, because one of the story strategy pieces when it came to Winston Churchill was, how do I get the United States involved to help us? All of it tied to story strategy on the messages, the stories that he needed to share with the United States at that point to get them into the war. So I just want people to recognize, if you are a CEO, you run a massive organization, you have a million things going on, you're working 12 plus hour days. How on earth, Amy, am I going to set aside time to go for a walk? Some of the greatest leaders in history that had way too much going on under intensive pressure, a pressure cooker, if you will, realized the creativity that could be spurred from walking. So with that said, I want to dive into what this looks like. I want to talk about you specifically, because obviously it would be different for other people. Just like the palate cleanse idea, I'm making it my own thing based on what you do. Obviously, I don't know Korean, so that's not the way I'm doing it. I'm doing something else. So people are going to take these ideas and they're gonna do what they're going to do based on their preferences and what they want. But I want you to take us through walking. So here's what I mean.
Mhm.
I'm trying to visualize what the walk would be. So maybe you're doing this on purpose, maybe this is more subconscious, so you might have to think a little bit more about this, but are you looking at the trees while you're walking? Are you walking slowly? Are you speed walking? Is there a certain distance? Is it a few blocks around your house? Like, take us through a typical walk that you would do to paint the picture for us on what walking looks like for you.
Right. Right. So for the busy people that you're talking about, I'm about to make the thing worse because I actually do 2 walks a day. So um, just to, if you ever read Atomic Habits, Matt, which you probably have, he talks a lot about habit stacking. So I believe in that. Stacking habits for busy people is the way to make a change in life where you actually will carry it through. So, every day. See, I work from home, so I don't have a commute, which will be different probably from some of the people that are listening. So, first thing I do every day is I drink a cup of coffee and I read the newspaper. So I do that every day just to know what's happening in the world and to let my brain start to come, like the lights to come up. I don't wake up really alert and alive. So the New York Times helps me to come up to date. A few things in there I link out. So I just let my brain come, the brightness on my brain, like on your phone, let the brightness come up to where I'm functioning. And then I'm a Bible reader. So I love to read the Bible. And so I do that every day, which I think is kind of interesting, talking about your Churchill and Lincoln examples, because, one of the things I come across, I try to read the Bible A to Z once a year. So I just get a plan that's online and follow it. And one of the things I'm interested in is that Jesus Christ is followed around by crowds in the thousands. And I'm always amazed when I get to all those points that say, so he withdrew to the mountain to pray. And I'm thinking of all people who are literally being pursued by thousands of interested listeners has time to pull aside into nature and just, be quiet for a little while. That's really interesting to me. Another person that's interesting on that front is Jonathan Edwards, which is arguably one of the best minds to ever come out of the United States of America. He walked, I think it might be 5 or 8 miles every single day. And he pulled away to organize his thoughts too. So that's a quick aside. So what I do is I will do that until 8 o'clock. And then at 8 o'clock, rain, snow, sun, shine, whatever, I walk out the door and I walk from 8 to 8:30 right in my neighborhood. And thankfully, I have an absolutely beautiful park-like neighborhood. So it's really a lot of great oxygen in the air and really beautiful to walk around there. I believe in 3x5s, Matt. So I buy them by the thousands. And then I just keep a list of things that I want to think about on a 3x5. So I always have a 3x5 in my pocket. I have one right now. And I will have that, and it'll just have like a word on it. So if I'm thinking about Matt Zaun's book, then I'll have that on there. Matt Zaun's book. If I'm thinking through a problem one of my children is having, I'll have their name and their problem on there. If I'm thinking about, the doctor's book that I'm talking about, I'll just have that on there. So I will pull out my 3x5 and just see what's on my mind. What needs sorting, as the British would say. And so I will look over the items that need sorting, and I will just walk and think about them and just, kind of set my mind free. So I choose to only, our neighborhood has lots of cul-de-sacs and side streets, but there is like one loop. And to just not have to make any decisions, I always just walk the loop so that I don't have to think about anything else except the things that are on my mind. So that's how I do it. I have topics that I want to think about, and I walk the same route so I don't have to make any decisions as I'm walking, and I can really set my mind free to just consider big picture the things that are on my 3x5.
So in practicality, here's how I think this could be incredibly insightful for people listening. So a lot of people listening have staff meetings. They need to go talk to their team or maybe the entire company, and clearly they would want to be inspiring, not dull, not boring. No one wants to be boring. They want to be vibrant. They want to be inspiring. They want to be influential. They want to be persuasive. So I do think a practical step to do that is for someone to go for a walk and just think about what their team might be thinking. What are some of the fears that their team members have? Continue to walk, think about all the fears. And maybe you're just thinking of 3 to 5 different things that are afraid of A, B, and C. And then there's different subcategories regarding that fear. So maybe one of the topic points is they're afraid of the changing economy. Okay, well, there's like 30 subcategories regarding the changing economy that you could think about. I do think that's a way to think in a creative manner. And I say that because one of the dangers that I see with a lot of C-suite executives when it comes to staff meetings is they're very focused on agenda items. Just check the box. They have this agenda and they just go check line by line by line through these different points, but it's not engaging. It's not vibrant. It doesn't grab the audience and pull them in and inspire them to take the actions that they want them to take. So I can really see how walking would be part of someone's process where, let's say that they have a staff meeting on Friday. Well, maybe they'd want to go for a walk on Wednesday afternoon, collect their thoughts, think about the creative aspects of that staff meeting. Another thing that you mentioned, the 3x5, I don't want people to miss this, the power in 3x5s, because very few people actually utilize them, I think, from a really good organizational perspective. Now, Amy, I'm sure you do this differently. This is just something that I've learned over the years that it's been incredibly helpful to me. A couple of years ago, I was really struggling with building out a new training. So I really wanted to get another training out into the world, and I had all these ideas. And you had mentioned on the last episode, I believe I forget exactly what you called it, but you mentioned soup. I think you said you turn soup into systems or something like that, where there's all these different ideas and someone has, what's that?
Sort the soup.
Sort the soup. That's it. Okay. Sort the soup. I knew there was some type of alliteration there with S's, right? So sort the soup. So I was really struggling, and I was writing and I had all these pieces of paper with stuff scratched on them. I had Google Docs where I had different paragraphs in. I was trying to collect my thoughts the best I possibly could. So what I did one day is I threw my hands up in the air and I said, I need to focus on organization, almost like what you said, the mental shelving, like building out shelves, if you will. But what I did was I took a pack of 3x5 index cards and I went to a hotel room. Now, not everyone needs to do this. I did this because I have 3 little kids. And as I'm sure you can imagine, if I did this in my house, my little kids would be running all over it. So it wasn't going to work. So I literally went into a hotel room. I had my stack of index cards. And what I did was I thought about the main concepts I wanted this training to teach people. So I had 3 main concepts. And then what I did was I set a timer. I believe it was 15 minutes for each topic. It's been so long now. I believe it was 15 minutes. But what I did was I wrote one word on each 3x5 card, and I kept flipping the card as it pertained to the topic. So everything, and you had talked about a bike, like the tires on a bike and the spokes. So I had one core theme within these three topics, and then the spokes were all the different topics on all the different cards. And one of the reasons why the hotel room was incredible for this was now I have tons and tons and tons of space where I have the bed, I have the desk, I have the floor. So if you would have walked into the hotel room, you might have thought I was like a serial killer or something. It was just cards everywhere. As far as you can see, there was nothing but cards all over the hotel room. So then what I did was I took the cards and I started to segment them and started to organize them. So I thought in my mind, okay, from this train to get from point A to point B, here's the start, and then here's step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. The point of this is for months and months of agony, not knowing how to do this, within one night in a hotel room, I built out the entire training from an organizational perspective. In a matter of weeks, I had all the content for it. It was wild, right?
Mhm.
So I'm saying this from a practical perspective. I really do think people listening can do this. Think about something that you need a surge of ideas for. Think of something that you're communicating to people. You're doing your best to inspire people, like a staff meeting. How would you come up with a speech for that staff meeting? Go for a walk, get a surge of ideas, figure out the pain point of your team and or your clients, dive into the topics of fear, get those topics, and then you can really use the 3x5 index cards to organize and to structure. And I think doing that, you'll be head and shoulders above everyone else when it comes to organization. So I don't know if you want to make any points regarding that mental shelving, but is there anything else based on what I shared that someone can do, at least to position themselves for not only the creative aspect, but also the organizational perspective, the systematic approach?
Yeah, I'll make one more comment, Matt. So, the walking, just to kind of sum it up for everybody listening, because everyone's in a different field or industry, the walking will answer the question, what matters and what doesn't. So the walking is just setting your mind free to see the big picture. Whether you're writing a company newsletter, starting a blog, writing a book project, or going to give a speech, or like you're using the example of a company meeting, all of those things, what matters and what doesn't, setting your brain free to get the big picture. And then everything that doesn't matter, you just cut off the table. So then you're ready for that next level, which I'm calling mental shelving. You're calling 3x5 organization into buckets. Whatever a person's system is, whether it's pictures, whether it's written words, whether it's mental buckets, that next layer is taking the stuff that you said, what matters on your walk, and then organizing that into buckets. So, what is your staff afraid of? That's a great example. What are they looking forward to? What are they hoping for? What do they want to feel from you? So putting all those things into categories that have teeth to them. And then the third layer for me is carrying out those mental buckets into a finished product, which is, in my life, I call that layering or making passes.
Layering and making passes. So talk a little bit more about that. What does that entail?
So, Matt, I'm a work ahead of schedule person, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing or drives my clients crazy. Sometimes I feel like a straight up nag, but I like to work far in advance because that's the way that I find I get the best end product. So I will call it making passes. I make passes over stuff. So let's say, a client gives me a chapter that we had all laid out in our table of contents, and the chapter is on how to handle insurance in your company. Everything that this person learned over 40 years on best practices and what really helps the company, what helps the staff, and handling insurance. Super boring topic. But we organized a chapter on this topic because everybody has to deal with insurance. And then we organized the subheadings of that chapter. And the client spoke into a voice recorder that turned into it to dictation, into text, topics 1, 2, 3, and 4 in that chapter. And then they handed me that raw content. So it's chapter 2, let's say, how to handle insurance, raw content in the most basic order. So I look at it and it's somewhat soupy at that point. So I'll just make passes over it once a day with the palette cleanser in between it and my next project. And I'll sort the soup on day 1 and make sure that everything is in, if I have 4 subheadings in the chapter, everything's in the right bucket, bucket 1, 2, 3, 4. The stories, the illustrations, the facts, the content, the history, it's in, subheading 1, 2, 3, or 4, it's in the right place. And then I walk away, do a palette cleanser, go on to the next project. The next day I get out that chapter 2 on insurance again, and I just go through and make sure that every sentence has like a punctuation, it's grammatically correct so that I can read it and understand what's being communicated in every sentence. And I walk away. And the third day, I'll come and make a third pass, and I'll take every sentence and I'll look at it as a block. And so if we're working in subheading number 1, I'll just make sure that the story is in the right place and the introduction, everybody understands what this subheading is about. Then there's a story that illustrates it, so people keep reading. We want everybody to keep on reading. And then they get the facts that add value to their life, to their business, to their experience. And then we conclude it in a way that ties it all together. So I just make sure that every subheading has a logical flow, and I walk away. And the next day I come back. And so I just make pass after pass until the day comes when I read chapter 2 on insurance and I can't even find one tweak. I can't make it any better. Everything looks amazing. It's engaging. It's interesting. It has plenty of illustrations and story. The facts add a lot of value. I just make sure that it's, I'll say perfect, and everybody understands. In a human way, it's perfect. I can't do any better. And then I know that it's ready to move on down the assembly line to my team of editors after that.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. You've given us a lot to think of. I'm so thankful that you are willing to do a series with us because there's so much more that we can pull out and we can dive deeper on. So I'm looking forward to that episode, the next one we're going to do. But I appreciate this one. I appreciate the time you gave us. And there's 3 things that I want to highlight and I want people to focus on. I did really appreciate you mentioning the walking piece. One of the dangers with this is because we're all used to walking, we know how to do it. I don't want people just to fly over the concept of something that they could be doing when it comes to a creative perspective. I think of a story regarding Vince Lombardi, where after losing a game, he held up a football and said, "Gentlemen, this is a football." Why would he be saying that to professional athletes at the top of their game? He's saying it because symbolically, it's we need to go back to the basics to win the next game. The same is true when it comes to walking. Very basic principle. I would challenge everyone listening, figure out how to actually walk. I know it sounds weird. I'll never forget a book my father had, which the book was How to Read a Book. And it went into all the different concepts on how you actually read a book to get maximum benefit out of it. I'll never forget that. So how do you actually walk? Are you going to shut your phone off, put it on Do Not Disturb? Are you going to walk during your lunch break? Are you going to walk on Thursday afternoons? And the reason why you're going to do that is there's going to be this surge of ideas to get ready for different meetings and events you have to come. How are you going to walk? Are you going to walk fast? Are you going to walk slow? What route are you going to take? So I really challenge people to think about that more. I also appreciate you mentioning the mental shelving piece. So I would challenge everyone listening, what are you doing from an organizational perspective? Are you setting up systems to be more organized with your thoughts? I think that was an incredible second point. And then the third and final point is the layering and making passes concept. This is fascinating to me because I visualize an assembly line. So a few months ago, I toured Motown in Detroit. Very intriguing to me. So for everyone listening that might not know, the gentleman who created Motown used to be an assembly line worker in the Ford manufacturing plant. And he recognized on this side of the conveyor belt, there's just metal. And then on the other end, there's a car, but there's all these processes that take place. So he was very good when it came to writing songs. So he said, is there any way that we can create an assembly line to do this? What he did was, if you go to the Motown, now Motown moved to California, but the old Motown in Detroit, it's a series of homes. He bought up a bunch of homes, and this home was, you're going to take a singer and you're going to teach the singer stage dynamics, how to perform on stage. This home was, you're going to talk about the branding and get the branding behind him. This home was, so basically he created an assembly line where a normal person that was really good at singing on the they would be on this end, and then at the end of the assembly line, they came out a star. And everyone listening knows Motown cranked out tons of stars. So there was an assembly line process. The reason why I say that is because I challenge people listening to come up with a process regarding this layering and making passes. So what it looks like, or what it might look like in people's world, is, do you have an assembly line process for getting ready for a meeting? Do you have an assembly line process for, you doing one-on-ones with one of your key executives? Do you have a process where you say, okay, how do I go from point A to point B to make sure that I'm going to get this across? Do you have an editing process yourself? So I challenge everyone listening to think about that more. So those are the three main concepts that I got from this episode. I'm excited to do the next one, but if people want to get more information on you, Amy, they want to find out a little bit more about your services, they want to reach out to you for a book, where's the best place they can go to get that information?
I just would start on my website, fernlingcreative.com. And I know, Matt, you put that in the show notes. So just go there and just start to fish around and see what we do, and see if there's anything on there that makes your life easier.
Perfect. Yeah, so absolutely include that in the show notes. People could just click and go. And Amy, thanks again. I look forward to our next episode together.
You're welcome, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. Please leave a review, since positive reviews will make it easier for others to find this conversation. Next episode will launch on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Until then, remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.